evening, and thanks for joining us tonight, everyone. I'm David Scott.
And I'm Adrienne Flores. Representative Dan Johnson is dead tonight in what the Bullitt County coroner is calling a probable suicide.
Our team of reporters has been following this WDRB News alert for the last several hours tonight. WDRB's Kyle Mitchell is live at the Heart of Fire City Church in Louisville, where just yesterday Johnson denied allegations of child molestation. But first tonight, WDRB's Sarah Sidery is live in his hometown of Mount Washington, where the representative reportedly killed himself. Sarah.
Investigators say Representative Dan Johnson appears to have committed suicide on this bridge you see here behind me. Right now, the scene is clear, but this was what we saw just a couple of hours ago. Investigators were focused on Johnson's SUV parked next to the bridge where crime tape was up nearby. Deputies say Johnson drove that silver SUV, a Ford Escape, over the bridge, pulled over, stood in front of the SUV, and shot himself one time.
A few hours before Representative Johnson took his life, he posted this on Facebook. It says in part, "I love God and I love my wife, who is the best wife in the world, my love forever. My mom and dad, my family, and all 5 of my kids and 9 grandchildren." He continued later in his post saying, quote, "I cannot handle it any longer. It has won this life, but heaven is my home." Representative Dan Johnson denied allegations of sexual misconduct just yesterday at the Heart of Fire City Church in Louisville.
WDRB's Kyle Mitchell is live at that church tonight. Kyle?
David, the sign out here says Satan accuses, God says you're not guilty. State Representative Dan Johnson dismissed the claims made against him yesterday right here at his church. On Monday, the chairman of the Republican Party of Kentucky called for Representative Johnson to resign. It came after a report emerged accusing him of sexually molesting a 17-year-old girl in a church basement in 2012.
As news of Representative Johnson's death came out tonight, lawmakers and Kentucky's governor were quick to react. Matt Bevin tweeted this, saying, quote, "Saddened to hear of tonight's death of Kentucky Representative Dan Johnson. My heart breaks for his family tonight. These are heavy days in Frankfort and in America. May God indeed shed his grace on all of us. We sure need it."
In other news tonight, police shoot an alleged armed robber at a Family Dollar.
WDRB's Fallon Glick is following this WDRB News alert. She explains what led up to the shooting and what the suspect was stealing. Fallon.
David, Adrienne, there are still a number of police officers on scene at this Family Dollar on West Broadway near 13th Street after police say an LMPD officer shot an alleged armed robber.
Also in the news, the University of Louisville is firing back against fired coach Rick Pitino.
The school has now filed its own lawsuit, saying the coach owes U of L for the damage he's brought to the school. October 16th, the University of Louisville fires its longtime head coach, weeks after revelations that U of L coaches were suspected of being involved in a bribery scheme to land recruits.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Adrienne Flores.
And I'm David Scott. The widow of Representative Dan Johnson now says she wants to finish the work he started.
WDRB's Lawrence Smith sat down with Rebecca Johnson tonight to talk about her husband's death and what she'll do next.
Rebecca Johnson wants to replace her husband in the State House. But first, we talked about how she's holding up after Johnson's shocking suicide.
I have this big, huge hole. Hurts. And I got to figure out what I'm going to do without the love of my life.
Rebecca Johnson says she became alarmed when someone told her about a cryptic post on her husband's Facebook page that sounded like a goodbye letter.
And I said, oh, this is terrible. This is not a good thing to put on Facebook. And I ran downstairs to look for my husband, and he wasn't there.
Funeral services for Johnson were announced today. Visitation will take place Saturday and Sunday at the Heart of Fire Church, where he was a pastor. People can pay their respects from 2 to 8. Then on Monday, funeral services for Johnson will take place at the Heart of Fire Church. Services will start at 11 and last about an hour. Johnson will be buried at the Mount Washington ceremony after the service.
One state lawmaker who spoke to Johnson just hours before his death says he's stunned. Richmond Republican Wesley Morgan became really good friends with Johnson at the Capitol. Morgan says his friend seemed fine when he spoke with him, despite the allegations he was facing. Morgan says he had no idea what Johnson was about to do.
Hey, resign. Go go and get out from under all this scrutiny and go sit down and talk to a lawyer and work out what it is you need to work out and move on with your life.
Morgan says he was absolutely devastated when he learned that Johnson had taken his own life.
Representative Dan Johnson stepped onto the political stage just last year.
But as WDRB's Fallon Glick explains, even before he became a state representative, he was surrounded by controversy.
I love America.
In 2016, Dan Johnson came into Kentucky politics by challenging an incumbent Democrat in the 49th district, which includes a large portion of Bullitt County. He was also the bishop of the Heart of Fire Church. And much like the sign at his church, Johnson said he was not a politically correct politician.
I want to be myself. I would rather be myself than be elected as state representative of the 49th.
The same went for his Facebook page. Johnson came under fire during his campaign for social media postings seen as racist. One photo featured a chimpanzee titled Obama's baby picture, and another one of President Obama and the First Lady with ape-like features.
An LMPD officer shoots an armed robbery suspect, and it's all caught on the officer's body camera. WDRB's Kyle Mitchell explains what we're learning tonight about the moments before and after that shooting. Kyle.
David, LMPD released that body camera video late this afternoon. It shows the shooting play out in just a matter of seconds.
Yes! Get down! Down! I got me. You hit me in the leg. Get down!
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Adrienne Flores.
And I'm David Scott. Investigators are calling it a pay-for-play scheme. Now the University of Louisville's men's basketball program is without a coach, and the university is without an athletics director, at least for now.
WDRB's Kyle Mitchell explains what the university is saying about its fate. Kyle.
Adrian, during the press conference this afternoon, an upset interim president Greg Postal made an announcement about their futures. Pitino is on unpaid leave, Jurich on paid leave. Pitino's contract calls for written notice for the reasons for termination and a chance to present evidence. Under Jurich's contract, he could be entitled to a 30-day window to address his firing.
Following the announcement, Tom Jurich and an attorney for Rick Pitino released statements.
Jurich had this to say, quote, "My intent has always been to run every athletic program at the university in an honest and compliant manner. It is heartbreaking to me that the alleged intentional and secret criminal acts can bring such harm to our school. I love this university, the Louisville community, and all of our fans."
Steve Pence, one of Coach Pitino's attorneys, released this statement on his behalf saying, quote, "The University of Louisville placed Coach Pitino on indefinite unpaid administrative leave today. It did not give him prior notice of the disciplinary action or an opportunity to be heard."
And the investigation into U of L's basketball program now has business owners around the city questioning how it will affect their bottom lines.
As WDRB's Sarah Sidery tells us, the NCAA's potential punishment could determine how big of a hit businesses take.
The men's program is the #1 moneymaker in college basketball, and nearby businesses have been able to cash in.
Downtown Louisville is the economic driver for the host state, and the Yum Center is one of the most significant parts of that.
And, of course, the impact of this investigation could also impact other U of L sports.
WDRB's Katie George with a unique perspective, being a former student athlete at the school.
You know, when you see your university that you attended, you see the athletic department that you represented for 4 years in a bad light, it's very upsetting. But I think for this situation, you talk about a lot of moving parts, and nobody's talking about the student athletes. Those are the people that I think are the real victims, the ones that are truly going to hurt from this. I remember back to when I was an athlete and the Katina Powell scandal broke. I was sitting in the locker room and all of our phones started buzzing. We were about to go out and play a game in the ACC. And we had text messages from basketball players, from other athletes, from people outside of the university asking what's going on, what's going to happen to the basketball program, are we going to be able to make it through? And it was a very dark time as student athletes, and so I can only feel for the student athletes currently going through this kind of situation again.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight, everyone. I'm David Scott.
And I'm Adrian Flores. Hall of Famer Rick Pitino fired in a unanimous decision earlier today.
We have live team coverage tonight from U of L's campus. We begin with WDRB's Travis Ragsdale, who tells us how the decision was made and the offer made to Pitino to walk away. Travis.
David, the meeting took about 5 hours, but ultimately the decision was to fire Hall of Fame coach Rick Pitino. Following the closed-door meeting, interim president Greg Postal said it was the culmination of a series of events that led to the firing. After the meeting with the U of L Athletic Association board, Pitino's attorney said the group had no authority to fire him for cause. Meanwhile, Tom Jurich's future could be decided at a Board of Trustees meeting here on Wednesday. WDRB's Sarah Sidery spoke to students and fans earlier today about the decision to fire Pitino. Sarah.
Travis, students say they weren't surprised by today's decision, but the disappointment here on campus is widespread.
So I said, it can't be Pitino because, Pitino is, a legend here.
The official end of an era at U of L.
It kind of broke not only my heart, being as a U of L Cardinal, but also my family's as well.
Students react after basketball coach Rick Pitino was fired on Monday.
We knew it was coming. It's devastating, but, it was expected.
What's next for Rick Pitino and the University of Louisville? Joining me now with a look at that is WDRB sports writer Rick Bosich. So, Rick, we heard again today Steve Pence say that Pitino knew nothing about what happened. He pointed out the fact that he passed a lie detector test, yet we have a unanimous vote to terminate him. Does it appear there's anything Steve Pence could have said today to have a different result?
You're right, David. When you go through these 50-page document that Steve Pence prepared, it's a compelling case for Rick Pitino. But I think you have to look at the situation over the last 8 years and say, okay, you had the Karen Cypher situation, you also had the Katina Powell situation, which put U of L basketball on probation, and now you're talking about the FBI being involved in a $100,000 payment to a recruit, and say it's not good publicity for U of L, it's not good for the image of the university, and the only way to change direction was to change coaches.
Of course, through good times and bad, Rick Pitino has had a storied career in Louisville. WDRB's Mike Lissette takes us through Pitino's highs and lows over the past 16 years as head basketball coach.
Following a failed stint with the NBA's Boston Celtics, Rick Pitino was named U of L's head coach on March 21st, 2001, marking his return to the college game. His Cardinals would soon become NCAA tournament regulars again, culminating with Final Four trips in 2005 and 2012, and then a national championship in 2013.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight, everyone. I'm David Scott.
And I'm Adrian Flores. U of L Athletics Director Tom Jurich is out after nearly 20 years with the university.
As WDRB's Sarah Sidery tells us, the Board of Trustees overwhelmingly today voted to fire Jurich.
The board voted to fire Jurich for cause, but as for reasons why, they will not say. This comes several weeks after the FBI announced the men's basketball program was involved in a recruiting scandal. Coach Rick Pitino was let go earlier this week, and this afternoon the Board of Trustees voted 10-3 to fire Jurich after meeting for 3 hours behind closed doors.
Of course, many U of L fans are speaking out about the now former athletics director and the decision to let him go.
WDRB's Joel Skipper tells us what they have to say and what they hope is next for the university. Joel.
David and Adrian, as you can imagine, reaction was mixed when it came to those who wanted Jurich to stay and those who wanted him to go. These two guys we chatted with have been best friends for about 50 years. One is a U of L fan, the other is a Kentucky fan. Both have their own take when it comes to the decision to get rid of Tom Jurich as athletic director.
In the end, scandal ultimately brought Rick Pitino and now Tom Jurich down.
As WDRB's Lindsay Allen explains, Jurich's legacy will include conference climbing, coach recruiting, and building sports facilities that rival some of the best in the nation.
It was October 1997 when California native Tom Jurich was hired to lead the U of L athletics department. At the time, the school was part of Conference USA, and the football team was in the midst of a 1-10 season. He promised to clean up the school's tainted image with 2 NCAA investigations underway.
Here we have a problem with the NCAA, so we have to do the same thing. We got a broken leg, we got to fix it.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Adrienne Flores.
And I'm David Scott. We begin tonight with a WDRB News alert. A trooper is shot and rushed to the hospital tonight, and police think they have the person who fired the gun.
Kyle Mitchell is following this WDRB News alert. He joins us live from Jeffersonville. So, Kyle, what happened right before the shooting?
This all started after an officer tried to pull someone over here at West Park Place and Jefferson Street in Jeffersonville. Ambulance rushed the trooper to University Hospital in Louisville with a gunshot wound. Police say his injuries are not life-threatening.
Days after a family of 3 dies in an apartment fire, we find a history of code violations on that property.
WDRB's Sarah Sidery tonight tells us what inspectors found there. Sarah.
Well, according to this report, a code inspector's most recent visit was less than 12 hours before the fire.
It ain't the same over here anymore.
Daniel Hayes lives on Shanks Lane, next door to where a mother and her 2 children were killed in an apartment fire last week. Frantic, Hayes says he filled a storage tub with water to help douse the flames.
Then I'd run up and throw it on the door. And I did that for probably a good 3 or 4 minutes, and then I kept screaming for a fire extinguisher.
Family and friends are getting ready to honor the mother and her 2 children killed in that apartment fire. Archie Riley, her 16-year-old daughter Savannah Cooper, and 11-year-old son Cameron Harris all died.
Serious claims tonight against an LMPD officer and the department. A fellow officer is suing LMPD and Metro government, saying she was the victim of sexual harassment, and the department tried to brush it away. The lieutenant says in February of last year, fellow Lieutenant Robert Shadle texted a photo of a man's private area and wrote, "Thinking about you."
Crews continue to clean up that big mess after millions of gallons of water spilled into Louisville's streets. This was a live look at Clay and Oak Streets as crews are trying to fix the road and that busted water main. Louisville water officials say the water shut off at this hour. All started at 8 o'clock this morning when a water main that was installed back in 1893 broke, shooting water into the air. Crews had to turn off more than a dozen valves in order to get that water to stop.